Well, welcome everybody to our first mini video lecture in this abnormal behavior class. I want to welcome you again to class. I hope that you so far have been able to kind of navigate around the classroom and find out where everything is located. I hope that you have looked and found the syllabus and that you've kind of gotten a good handle on kind of how we have this particular class organized this semester. So as always, email me or contact me if you have any questions. But this is our mini lecture video for module number 1, which we titled Foundations, Module 1 Foundations. And this module runs for the first week of class, August the 24th through the 31st. And then next week on Monday the 31st, module number 2 will open. And beginning with module number 2, as we talked about in our intro video, starting with module 2, all of the modules will cover 2 weeks. This first module just covers 1 week, and we'll talk more about that next week when we start talking about schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder in module number 2. But this is module number 1, Foundations. And let me just say a couple of words of just kind of by word of introduction and announcement again. If you've already looked around a little bit inside the module, you're going to see several things that I have posted for you. And this is going to be very, very typical for every single module as we go all the way through the class. So there are some lecture notes that look like that I have typed up for you. This little video lecture goes right alongside the lecture notes. You'll also see a PowerPoint presentation within the module as well too that you can review. And again, the lecture notes and this little video go right with the PowerPoint slides. I've got some handouts posted for you like this one on myths and facts about mental health conditions. And here's one about information about the DSM-5 and some pros and cons, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit related to the medical model. I always have some handouts that normally if we were meeting in class face to face, I'd be handing these out for you to put into your notebook and to have with you. So there's 3 or 4 handouts that I want you to review. And that'll be the case with every single module. There is information for you to begin working through. There's also a homework assignment that I want you to then write up for me. It is due by 12 o'clock noon on Monday the 31st. And it's just my way of making sure that you have gone in and listened to the video, you've looked at the PowerPoint, you've looked at the lecture notes, and that you're keeping up with the information that is provided. It's kind of my way of reinforcing the information that I think is really, really important. Also, too, if you already have your textbook, the DSM-5, which we're going to talk some more about here in just a minute or two, you can go ahead and begin reviewing pages 5 through 25 just by way of introduction. Those pages cover 2 or 3 different small chapters that just give you an overview and kind of an introduction into what is the DSM-5. And we're going to talk some more about that in just a second with this little foundational interview. So be reading if you'd like to be reading for that. Also, too, the website review assignment. I told you last time we talked on the video that you've got several little module homework assignments you're going to be doing, including module 1 homework, which is already posted for you. But you've also got 2 other written assignments you're going to do, and I've already got your first one posted for you. It's due by noon on Friday, September the 18th. It is called the website review assignment. And you should also go and find that assignment as well. Very, very quickly, let me say a word or two about that. This is a very basic assignment. It's a very basic written assignment where I have given you some websites to go and review. All of the websites are related to mental health conditions, and there are several good ones out there that I use all the time, both as a professional. I use them as I'm making referrals for people for counseling. I use them to update my information in my lectures, and this assignment really is just intended to expose you to those websites and to kind of raise your awareness that they are out there. And there are lots, as you know, there's lots of stuff on the internet. And that doesn't mean that all of it's good, right? So these websites are really, really good. And it's my way of reinforcing with you that these resources are out there is by getting you to go to some of them and to review and research and see what all kinds of good information they have in there. So this assignment is intended to raise your awareness of these websites and the information that's contained within them. And I give you some instructions on the assignment outline, so go and find that. as to what I want you to be looking for and how I want you to write that up and type that up for me and turn in. It is due by Friday, September the 18th. So there is that. There is also that announcement as well too. And again, next Monday, the 31st, module number 2 will open and we will begin talking about schizophrenia. So this module number 1 is called Foundations. And what we want to do this week very, very briefly is really just lay some groundwork as to what this class is about. I've already told you this class is about mental health problems or mental illness or mental health conditions. And this is a specific population that we work with in the social services field. And so that's really what we talk about in this class. And we're really going to get into that starting next week in module number 2. So just to make sure we're all on the same page and just make sure that we're aware of terminology, as we go through this class, both in the lecture notes and the PowerPoint slides and also too in my little video lectures, I'm going to be using some terminology interchangeably. The words mental illness, mental and emotional disorders, mental health problems, mental health conditions, mental health struggles. All of those words to me really kind of mean the same thing for this class. Now, technically, some of those words have different definitions. But for this class, I'm going to be using those terms interchangeably. Most often, I use the term mental health conditions. But you know what we're talking about, I think. We're talking about those types of problems that every single one of us is familiar with. Every single one of us is familiar with that mental, emotional, behavioral part of us and some of the struggles that we sometimes can experience and can feel. Now, does that mean that every single one of us has a mental illness or a mental health condition? No. Does that mean that every single one of us needs to go be diagnosed and see a psychiatrist and be placed on medication? No, not everyone. Not all of us. Not all of us do our mental health struggles rise to that level to where we would call them like a diagnosis or a disorder or a condition. But all of us know what it's like to feel down, depressed, anxious, to sometimes feel overwhelmed, to sometimes feel overloaded, to sometimes maybe have some struggles in how we look at the world, how we think. Those kinds of, sometimes we may struggle with a behavioral addiction or a substance addiction. All of that falls into the category of mental health conditions. And all of us have this thing called our mental health. Just as we have our physical health and we want to take care of our physical bodies, we also too want to take care of our mental, emotional health because that is an important part of who we are. And we have known for years that there are times when people of all ages, children, adolescents, young adults, middle adults, older adults, men and women, struggle with what we call mental illness or mental health conditions. Those types of conditions have been around for years and for years and for years. But up until recently, we didn't really understand a lot about what they were, what caused them. And and even today, there still is a lot of negative attitude and stigma about mental health conditions. And the reality is this: all of us experience mental health struggles. And the reality is, if you're going to work in social services, you need to be familiar with what those kinds of struggles are. Even if you're never going to be a mental health counselor or substance abuse counselor, anything like that at all, it's good for you to be aware, and all of us to be aware of what mental health conditions are, what they look like, where they come from, how they affect people's lives. And it's important for us to make sure that we aren't one that holds some of those negative attitudes towards people who have mental health conditions. Mental health conditions are those kinds of conditions that just negatively affect a person's thinking and feeling and behavior and mood. And again, we know more today than we ever have about those types of conditions, about these types of conditions. And my hope is in this class, I want to raise your awareness and your understanding of the different types of mental health conditions that we sometimes see in our world. But all of us are familiar with mental health problems. We're familiar from our own lives. We're familiar from people around us. I guarantee you know someone, I do, you know someone, family, friend, coworker, who struggles at times with mental health problems, whether it be depression, bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiousness, worry, fears, phobias, panic attacks. Maybe you know someone, I do. I know someone who has a member of their family diagnosed with schizophrenia. We're going to talk about schizophrenia next week. Last semester, I had 2 students who came and spoke to me about loved ones who they were worried about who have eating disorder. It sounded like what we call an eating disorder. One of them it sounded like struggled with what's called anorexia nervosa. The other student, they're concerned about a family member. It sounded like it was what we call bulimia nervosa. We're going to talk about both of those later this semester. So all of us know people in our family, in our circle of influence at our church or wherever it may be. We all know folks who struggle, and maybe even us ourselves, we struggle at times with mental health problems. And there's no shame in that. Like I said a second ago, for many, many years, these types of problems, sort of like addiction, was kept under wraps, and there was all kinds of shame and negative stigma. And we're kind of coming out of that basically a little bit. But all of us know someone, and all of us have been affected by mental health problems. I've got a handout posted for you. I'm not going to review it with you here. I've got this handout right here posted for you in the lecture notes. And it just lists several myths and facts. There's a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation in our world today, even today, with all of our advances in technology and all of our openness and all of our tolerance. There still today are all kind of myths around mental illness and mental health problems. Like, for example, the belief that they don't really exist, that they're just made up. The belief that when people struggle with mental health conditions, that they're crazy, that they're unstable, that they're dangerous. The belief that people who have mental health conditions are just weak, or that they make up their symptoms. Um, People sometimes believe that only people who grow up in poor environments or crazy chaotic families, only those types of people have mental health struggles. If you grew up in a nice home in a nice neighborhood with parents who had money, or you yourself have money, well, then obviously you don't struggle with mental health problems. That's not true. That's a myth. Lots of people of all ages, struggle with mental health problems and mental health kinds of conditions. I list for you in your lecture notes 5 basic truths. I want to highlight real quick those 5 basic truths about mental health conditions. Number one, they are real. They are real conditions. They are not made up. They are not fake. They're not invented by the government or the medical society or pharmaceutical companies to make a bunch of money off people. That is not true. None of that is true. These are real conditions, not something made up. Number two, these are conditions that can be assessed, identified, evaluated, and treated appropriately. We have all kinds of treatment today, and we have all kinds of ways of assessing and evaluating. If you thought you had diabetes or cancer, you'd go to the doctor, and the doctor would evaluate you based on your symptoms. We'll talk more about that here in a second. And they would give you a diagnosis, and they would give you a treatment. We do the same thing today with mental health conditions. There's no reason for someone to struggle by themselves in isolation and alone. Help is available. They are real, and they can be assessed fully and treated fully. Number three, mental health problems are equal opportunity issues. Mental health problems affect men and women almost equally. Mental health problems affect white people, black people, brown people, people in America, people all over the world, poor people, wealthy people, middle class, educated, uneducated, teenager, 20-something-year-old, 50-something-year-old, single person, married person. Mental health conditions are seen equally across the board. We see them everywhere. It doesn't matter where you work. Are you going to work with homeless people? You're going to encounter people with mental health problems. Are you going to work in the suburbs with people who have money and education? You're going to deal with people who have mental health problems. Are you going to work with minorities? You're going to see mental health problems. Caucasian people, mental health problems. You get my point, right? Educated, uneducated, no matter where you work, young, old, these are equal opportunity kinds of struggles. Mental health problems can and do affect people at any point in their lifespan. Younger people, middle-aged people, older people do struggle with mental health problems. But the key thing, and we're going to talk about this several times this semester, the vast majority of mental health problems begin between the ages of 15 and 25. So between the ages of 15 and 25, nearly 90% of people who struggle with mental health problems, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, schizophrenia, eating disorders, personality disorders, dissociative, almost 90% of people who have been diagnosed with a mental health condition, when you ask them, when did these problems start? You haven't always struggled with this, have you? Well, not all of my life. When did you first notice this problem? In almost 90% of the cases, people say, well, when I was a teenager, or when I was in college, between 15 and 25, nearly all mental health conditions begin to show themselves in people's lives. Does that mean that people always understand them? No. Does that mean that people are always diagnosed with them? No. But usually between the ages of 15 and 25 is when most mental health conditions begin. Now, they can and do affect people of all ages. But as far as the what we call the course, how does a problem begin and show itself? Almost always between the ages of 15 and 25. And then lastly, fifth idea is this. We believe that mental health conditions primarily are brain-based and neurological in nature. Does that mean that someone's environment does not affect mental health conditions? People's environment can affect mental health conditions, but we think that most mental health conditions are brain-based, neurological in nature. Have you ever heard the phrase a chemical imbalance? When I was working in mental health counseling, the majority of my counseling has been in mental health counseling, working with people with mental health problems. When I was working in mental health counseling, I probably said the phrase chemical imbalance hundreds of times as I was trying to communicate to people what this problem in their life really was. People beat up on themselves. They feel ashamed. They feel embarrassed that they battle depression, that they battle bipolar disorder, that they have panic attacks, that they battle anxiety. And they think it's about them. They think that it's them not handling their world appropriately or something like that. And almost always, mental health conditions are genetic in nature. They are brain-based chemical imbalances in nature. That's why when we give people medication, it almost always helps. If mental health conditions were not brain-based, medicine would not work. But because they are brain-based, medicine works. There's a reason for that. It's because most mental health conditions are brain-based. They're neurological in nature. They're not necessarily caused by poor parenting, bad experiences necessarily, although environment does come into play. It really is more about biology than it is experience, is the phrase we use in counseling. Most mental health conditions are more about biology than they are experience. And so again, experiences and environment does impact how we see mental health conditions affecting people. But it's more neurological than environmental is the phrase we would use. So let me talk about this for just a little bit in this video, and then we're going to sort of go to part 2 of this lecture video. I want to talk to you about this. One of the things I want you to be familiar with is just the 3 Ds. The 3 Ds of a disorder. And so here's what that is. So what this means is this. I said earlier that all of us are familiar with mental health problems. We all know what it's like to feel down and depressed and feel blue, to feel worried and anxious about something. Maybe sometimes we drink or consume alcohol or other substances or whatever it may be. Sometimes we overeat or undereat a little bit, So all of us at times in our lives may have some experiences with some of these mental health kinds of conditions. But does that mean that all of us have a mental health condition or a mental illness? No. Well, when does an everyday, air quote time here, when does an everyday, get my quotes up, problem become a disorder or a diagnosis? Well, there's 3 Ds we look at, and there's an overlap between these Ds. Those Ds are disruptive, distressing, and detour. And I give you some information about each of those in both the PowerPoint presentation and the lecture notes. But just real quickly, disruptive just means this. We know that someone's everyday depression, I'm going to use depression as an example because that's something that all of us can identify with. Most of us have felt depressed or down or sad or blue at some point in our lives. Does that mean that we have clinical depression? No. But we get worried about someone's depression when, number one, it becomes disruptive. Their depression is so strong or it lasts for so long that it begins to disrupt their normal daily functioning. They stop going to class. They start missing work. It begins to negatively affect their health. It begins to negatively affect their relationships. So when a problem becomes disruptive in daily functioning, it somehow is causing problems in other areas of my life. That's one of the things we look for that helps us to understand, hey, this may not be just your typical everyday depression or anxiety. Anxiety is another good, I could use anxiety as an example because all of us are familiar with anxiety. Well, lots of people feel anxious and nervous and tense. Does that mean that I have an anxiety disorder? No. But if your anxiety is strong enough or intense enough or common enough, or chronic enough that it's becoming, or it has become, or it is disruptive to your daily functioning, now we have a concern. Secondly, and kind of related, kind of an overlap, is what is distressing. So distressing is this idea that my problems have become so consistent and persistent that I'm beginning to worry about them, and or someone who loves me or cares about me is becoming distressed, creates distress for me or someone around me. So one of the things we kind of get concerned about is if my depression is so intense or so strong, or my anxiety or whatever, that I've begun to wonder, what is this about? What is going on inside of me? This is not right. This is not normal. Or if I think it's normal, but other people around me are saying to me, you need to get help for this, then that would sort of meet the criteria for distressing. Some of you are going to be drug and alcohol counselors. And one of the things we know with addiction especially is people can be in denial about their own problems. That's true. That can be true for any problem. And a lot of people who struggle with addiction especially, but this is also true of mental health, in their own world, this is just their normal world, right? But other people around them, that's why sometimes when we do drug and alcohol assessments, we ask people questions like, has anyone ever spoken to you about their concern about your drinking? Because if you just say to the client, do you think you have a problem? Sometimes clients sometimes say no, right? So the better question for addiction is, has anyone ever expressed concern to you, ever or recently, about your drinking? Because distressing isn't just about me, it's about the people around me. And that's true for mental health conditions too. Has my problem become, is it intense enough? Is it strong enough? Or is it out of the ordinary to the point to where I don't know what it is and it's distressing to me or others around me? That would be another D we would look for. In addition to disruptive, is it distressing? And then the last is the word detour. I have the word detour in air quotes, right? And the word detour, a detour is sort of a side road. You can't go this way, you got to go around this way. So a detour just means this. Is my depression or is my anxiety outside the realm of typical, of average, of expected? I don't want to use the word normal, but we all know, I think most of us kind of understand that, that of kind of what's typical or what's expected or what's kind of normal. The example I give you in the lecture notes, because I give you some little case scenario examples with all three of these. I shared the example I share with you for detour is an example of a young woman who is not sleeping. And to her, it's not a big deal that she's not sleeping. But her sleep is just it's outside the realm of typical. Most average, normal, healthy people at the end of the day or whenever, most of us are tired at the end of the day. We have to lay down and go to sleep. Now, whether we go to sleep or not, it's a whole other story. But if I'm able to stay up for 3 and 4 days straight and I don't feel tired, that's not normal. No offense. That's not. People sometimes say, "Well, Professor Crean, there's no such thing as normal." Yeah, there is. We wouldn't have a class called abnormal behavior if there wasn't something called normal. Most of us know kind of what normal is, right? If someone came to you and said, "Yeah, I haven't eaten in 5 days, and I'm not even hungry," you would say, "You need to go see a doctor." That's not right. That's not normal, right? That's not typical. If you don't like the word normal, the word typical. Most of us, if I'm up for 3 or 4 straight days, I'm exhausted. Well, if I'm up for 3 or 4 straight days and I'm not high on any substances or drugs and I'm not tired, well, that's not typical. If my anxiety is so strong that I can't even leave the home, well, that's not typical. That's not normal, right? Most of us someone can have anxiety, but I'm able to at least leave the home. If my anxiety is so strong I can't even speak to people, well, that's a detour. That's just not typical, average, expected, what we would expect for most people, right? So those 3 Ds, disruptive, distressing, and detour, are 3 good little assessment kind of variables that we can kind of grab onto when we think about abnormal behavior, when we think about mental health conditions. Every single mental health condition we're going to talk about in this class is actually a diagnosis. It's an actual medical diagnosis. So depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, all of those are disorders, but they're also diagnoses. Well, nothing is ever diagnosed. Nothing is ever a disorder unless it is distressing, it is disruptive, and it's a detour. So those 3 things always come into play. If someone's struggle doesn't meet those three criteria, well, then it's just a struggle. But if someone, again, I'm going to use depression again as an example. If someone's depression is so strong and consistent, it is disruptive to my daily functioning. It is distressing to me and or other people around me. And it's just outside the realm of typical, what most people would experience with depression, a detour. Well, now we are in the neighborhood of a condition or a diagnosis or a disorder, the three Ds of a disorder. So be familiar with those as well too: disruptive, distressing, and detour. Okay, so this is the end of this first part. This is just part one of this little mini lecture. I want you to look for part two. And we're just going to finish up and take a few more minutes to talk a little bit about the DSM-5, talk a little bit about the medical model. But this is just by way of introduction. We've talked a little bit about what mental health conditions are, talked a little bit about some myths, some facts, some truths, and we've talked about the three Ds in this little first video. Look for the second one. We'll talk about the medical model and the DSM-5. All right, see you next time.